let's talk about indexing. So the questions are, you know, what's your process for indexing and has it changed and has it evolved? And what do you do when you can't find something? And anything else that you want to say about indexing?
I'm going to want to share my down facing. So this is part of my index. I just wanted to put it in a separate little box and have enough of a V so that you could see what's here. So with the way I started, I'm just going to look at the D's. So the way I started was with topic names. Topic names, topic names. And there were lots and lots of these. And what I did at the very beginning, from the very first day, it was topic names augmented by dates. So this is the Z log. And every date that I installed stuff into my Zettelkasten, I wrote down, what did I put in so that, and I've got like 5 of these, so that, this answers your question, what do I do if I can't find something in the index? I do, well, about when do I think that was? And that supplements these lousy index entries, which don't summon up a full thought. And now this thing right here, footprints in dreams. Footprints in dreams, and it's like it's all over my Zettelkasten from a date in May. It's a single card that I created that connects a whole lot of threads in my life. And there are so many threads that it connects that it ought to be about 10 cards. But it was a single card with all sorts of concepts on it. But at least I did it, and I have a tagline, Footprints in Dreams. And so when I read Footprints in Dreams, what I know experientially is, well, that's that card where I really kind of got naked with Nadia. It's very personal, and yet has lots of threads that go outward. And then looking forward to so I've introduced taglines, and then I did what Kathleen recommends, which is promoting certain, so this is a D, so I'm going to put it back in the Ds. Promoting certain cards as their own card when they've had 3 or more with that keyword. And then, because I started doing a lot of that, sorry if I'm going on too long, I started doing a lot of that, I found it really useful to have tabs for those. I'm all about the tabs. And you can see, if you were to read my index now, you might think, well, I'm going to start with those tabbed things because that's the stuff that is more represented. It's like a histogram. Very cool. Love it. And then looking back at that card, that Footprints and Dream card, literally there were 24 different things connected to it in some way. To recognize in creating a tagline, if you can't create a tagline that hits all the concepts that you've got in that card needs to be split. It's and I think of it as story splitting. In agile development, what you do is you create what's called a user story. You say, as an author, I want a way to save my research so that I can pull tidbits of my research that pertain to the work that I'm writing, right? That would be a user story. And you could probably create a summary title of that thing. And if your user story is much more complicated, has many more moving parts to it, what you've got is called an epic. You need to break that down into user stories. And so in agile development, and I have worked as an agile coach, that's one of the first things that we learn how to help people do, is find where are the split points of your epic, so that each of your ideas is its own little thing that you can allow to blossom on its own. So that's how Nadia Z has evolved.
That is cool. That is so cool. I'm so glad that you shared that piece, because I always wondered how the additional tabs functioned, if those were things that you knew that you would be reading or exploring, or if those evolved out of the box. So that makes total sense.
Yeah, I started out anticipating on that same, fateful day when I was indexing footprints and dreams. On that fateful day, I started anticipating what are the things that I think are going to develop into their own cards. And then
Mm-hmm.
I thought, no, let's just let them evolve. When they show up is when they show up. And so I went back very quickly to Kathleen's recommendations, like, well, look for two of them. If you
Yeah.
found two of them and you're about to add a third, you're going to add one of those cards. It works great, and things ripen.
Oh yeah.
I'm high on my index. Love it. I want to hug it.
Right. Well, I can go next since I'm the non-traditionalist of the indexers. When I started my note box, my first principle, which many know, was I knew immediately that this was not going to be a tool for nonfiction at that time. At the time, I was writing a novel, and so I knew it was going to need to contain this largely made up universe that was hung onto a framework of an existing reality. So when I went through Scott's system and looked at how to set it all up, the index bib box main box concept took me a while to wrap my head around. I kept getting my index cards and my main cards confused. And I started thinking very, very early on, like from the very first cards, I started thinking all of these carded receptacles are not going to work for me. Having 3 of them, it's too hard for my brain to partition that off, because so much of what I was indexing didn't have bib cards because it was made up. So I had to figure out, how am I going to capture these things and be somewhat true to the system, suspecting down the road I would be using it for nonfiction, which it certainly evolved that way. So the first thing that I did was I sat down with just a piece of paper and made columns that represented the academic disciplines. And so my first 5 buckets are the 5 ones that Scott gives you. And then 6 and 7 were kind of the wild card at that point. Almost immediately, I knew that the 7,000s would be where my novel material would live, but I still didn't really know what that was going to look like. So I tried my hand at using a card index for about 1 day, and that's being generous, because I knew immediately I was going to get lost in looking through all these cards for stuff that I had made up. I'm like, this is not going to work, because it didn't fit the system. So it's like, okay, scrap that. So I defaulted to my favorite happy place, which is a happy planner. And my second most favorite happy things, which are tabbed indexes. And these are just tabbed A through Z. And I thought, okay, using my little schematic of where things go, I'm just going to go through my alphabetized tabs, and I'm just going to start recording in a list fashion, in no particular order, things that I know I'm going to need to get back to. So like, for example, I'm looking at A. The first entry is the Awkward Squad. That's a group of men who trained themselves to go off to World War I. Asymmetrical warfare. That's something that my main male character knows very well, etc. and so on, all the way down through Aristotle, Asemic writing, Asaph the Physic from the Bible. There's a million of them. So once I made out that list, I thought, this makes sense to me. Because for my story world, when I go to look for something, I need to see as much of that story world index real estate as possible so that I'm seeing it all in relation to each other, which functions in the same way as, say, going to your main box and thumbing through cards and making those connections. I needed to see as much as I could on one page for that process to work for me for fiction. So that's how my index evolved, is now I've gone, now every tab has two. So there's two A's, two B's, because it's expanding out. And I also go over on to the back, like my C is crazy. So I want to show you that one because you will notice, in the same way that Julianne described cards getting separated out, like as you might call a collection or a directory, I did that. But rather than adding that card with a tab, I just put all of those terms onto a single card and punch them, and they just get slotted into the happy planner. And so they live under that letter, but they're just in the planner under that letter. So I use the system the same way, it just looks differently. So the second thing that I did, which delineates in my mind what is where, is on C, I don't know if you can see, on the left side of the page are what I would call nonfiction terms. This is more like your traditional Scott Shepper reading, capturing of information. Over here under C, these are character names, these are character places, C words that are specific to my story. So in that way, with that division on the page, if I'm looking for a concept, a book, what have you, it's in more the proper left aligned margin side. If I'm looking for something specific to the story, which is most often character bound, those are returned down half the page on the right hand side, against the right margin. So visually, again, I can always see this is real life, these are reality, this is research, and these are where my characters and story specific stuff lives. So that was how I had to kind of massage my index into something that would serve me in the way that I needed to for the writing. And then I was a little worried. I thought, well, when I start installing nonfiction stuff, is that going to work? And it absolutely did. I just divided the page in half and kept the world separate. So that's how mine evolved and works ridiculously well for me. Sometimes if I'm stuck, I just go look at an index page for that character and I just look around and remember, ooh, I could add this over there. And it just kind of sends you down that road because it's all right there on the page.
Whew.
Wonderful.
One of the things that
Wilma-
reminds me of is your division of the page into different zones.
Mm-hmm.
It's a drinking game. Julianne's going to bring up Anthony Metivier. Anthony Metivier talks about ways that certain paper artifacts act like a memory palace, in that you have spatial memory of that thing. And so you have the spatial memory that you now know, if I'm looking for stuff in my story, it's on the right-hand side. Yes. And yeah, just dividing the space in a way that is very orienting and easy to recall.
Yeah, that is a critical part of all of my process. It's part of how I live my life.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that fully. Like I didn't have that gravitas of an aha moment until I set up the standing desk to write my Zettelkasten for Fiction Writers book. When I set up that desk over there and populated it with only the things I need for that book, nothing else gets to go over there. As soon as I go over there, I know this is chapter 1 through 10. This is chapter 11 through 22. This is the note box that I'm working out of. This is where the note box lives that has everything I've used. Everything has its place. So when I step into that space, it literally is like looking around the inside of my brain. Because for me, a huge part of my resistance was having to sit down and find things, or having to sit down and situate the things that I was going to use. I could waste an entire afternoon just setting up my workspace. I'm like, this is not going to work. I don't have time to waste. So it's like it has to have a dedicated space. And once I did that, no lie, my productivity doubled because it took all of that dithering and puttering away. And now my brain immediately knows where everything is. It's left the way that I leave it, and I go right back into the flow. So for me, that was a critical piece of getting the work done. It really made a difference. And I credit the Memory Palace because I'd never thought of it like that before, but man, did it work.
Like you cross the threshold and you're in the office of that book.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, if I could just keep the novel from distracting me, it doesn't care where I am. Seriously, I'm sitting on the couch last night having tea, waiting for dinner to finish, and I'm supposed to be reviewing my notes from the day for writing the book. And what do I have show up but a whole new chapter idea for the novel? I'm like, no! But I wrote it down. It's safekeeping, but I'm like, you can't make this stuff up. It just dogs you.
Yes.
But it's a good scene.
Well, my index, I made every mistake in the book.
Thank
in
you.
Creating an index. And the first thing that I began to do, and I'm going to pull a card, might as well use the letter D since Julianne set the pattern. Here's my index.
It scares me.
And D isn't the best one for showing it, but see those blue, those purple angle brackets? All of those are categories. And my categories got full names, but they were titles. Like I've got Design Philosophy for Language course. Not a bad title. Concept documentation. Each one of these things was just a title for a category system. And everything I did early on was based on categories. I was frightened of numbering the cards. So I created a system that I called clumps and dividers, and I just set up the dividers. I used my effortless numbering system to give numbers to the dividers, but I did not give numbers to the individual cards. They had, every card in that clump had the same number as the divider number. And then everything went into a clump based on whether it fit the category. So it's, oh, this goes in this category, plunk. This goes in this category, plunk. And when the categories got too fat, then I divvied them up and said, what are the subcategories going on here? And I would break it up into maybe 3 or 4 subcategories, and I'd use a different color divider to separate it. Now I'm in a clump. Well, the problem with that process is I'm never thinking about relationships between the cards. I'm only thinking about membership in a clump. And that's a very static procedure. It doesn't really lead to anything. So it wasn't until I started putting a full tagline with each card that summarized the whole card and brought the whole card back to memory and began indexing every keyword in that tagline, then I suddenly had an index that really worked for me. Well, the tragedy was that while I was working from the clump and the card itself did not have a separate card number, all I had was the names of clumps. And I had no idea and no index and no path into whatever richness was contained within that clump.
Oh.
So that was a really, really, really bad mistake. So now I'm gradually, if I find myself looking for something that I cannot find the relating card and I kind of feel that it's there, then I put my clump hat on. And I think, okay, what clump would I have put that into? And I look it up by the clump. And when I go to the clump and pull out the clump and uh, file through it and I find my right card, well, then that clump has to be cleaned up. Now, long ago, when I first switched to numbering every card, I began, every time I touched a clump, I gave every card in the clump a number, but I did not index them. So now when I find a card that's in a clump, the whole clump gets indexed. And
Ooh.
I convert the divider card that was just a title, that becomes a foundation card, and it becomes a real main foundation card, and it gets indexed as well. So gradually, I'm working through some of that material that got lost. And I'm kind of being astounded at what I'm finding in it. So it's been a lot of fun. That's my index journey.
You
That's
kind of
good.
accidentally created for yourself time capsules, because since they weren't indexed, they got left alone for a long time, and now you're slowly rediscovering them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and
That's
Julianne, I
awesome.
love your Z file as well. And I've been debating doing something like that for a long time. And you've done it and you've proved that it's doable. It's not an insane amount of additional work. So I think I would like to do that. And I think I would like to give each new card that I add, an ID number. And so that we'll also have like um, as you would put in a SQL file, a unique identifier.
How is that different from the address? That's where
Well,
my
because
puzzled face.
the address, the card gets filed by address with its association, and it
Uh-huh.
also contains some kind of an ID number. Maybe it's just the date. Maybe I don't need a separate ID number, but something that would also tie it into time. Because
Okay.
I really enjoy when I run into one of my personal reflection cards because they all have the date, but none of my other cards have the date. And I think that's sometimes pretty valuable.
Yeah. Okay. So you're thinking of just doing some kind of an effortless numbering of the current date when you create a new card.
Yeah. And maybe just the
And
date.
then index that in a log or something. Yeah.
Yeah. To keep in a log like your Z log so that
Yeah.
as you
Could
mentioned,
work. Yeah.
if you can't
Better than
find,
what I'm doing.
yeah, yeah. For exactly the same reason why you mentioned it.
I got started with keywords, as Scott pretty much teaches us, Scott Shepper. And I used to give the advice to people who were freaking out about indexing to, not worry about it. And, just write down a few keywords. But if later you can't find a card, you should, once you find it, index every keyword that you tried to find it under and couldn't. Okay, that was my advice.
Nice.
And I think that's good advice for keywords. But and I'll tell you where I got that advice in a minute. But the problem here is context dependent memory. Like, you know, it's been shown that like the flavor of gum that you chew while you're studying, if you chew that same flavor of gum at the test, you'll do better than if you don't, just because it helps recreate the environment that you had while you were studying. And so the problem with keywords is when you're making a new card that's not immediately obvious how it connects to the keywords, you won't even think of them. Um, so that is
Right.
why I started not too long ago, I don't know, 3, 4 months ago, trying out the tagline system of Kathleen. And the tagline
Huh?
system is amazing because it is coherent, and it brings the whole card back, and then you're filing it in multiple places, and that allows for when you're searching for something similar, these things pop up that you never would have made a connection to before, with just keywords.
Yeah.
um, but the keyword thing, before I discovered Zettelkasten, I had run across this really weird little book that was self-published. It was called How to Make a Map of Every Thought That You Think by a guy named Lion Kimbrough. And, it's available on the internet if you search for his name. But he had almost all of the elements of a Zettelkasten that he had sort of worked out on his own. It was in a binder though. It wasn't on cards, and that was part of the problem. And it also was more topic based. It didn't connect as easily as the Zettelkasten cards do. But that was his advice. Don't try to think of every index term that you need ahead of time, because you'll drive yourself crazy and you'll fill up the index with things that you don't actually need. So I need to reread that book, because while it was a complete failure for me as far as actually capturing things, it sort of set the stage. So once I did discover the Zettelkasten, I'm like, oh, I already know a lot of this stuff. It just wasn't in the right configuration. And I think this guy would love the Zettelkasten. I don't know if he's ever run across it or not, but because the last thing I read by him, he had changed his system and was sort of like notebook based. But like, I think he would love the analog Zettelkasten if he ever discovered it or tried it. So yeah. So now, yes, what do I do when I can't find something? That's where we get into the memory dependent context dependent memory, because a lot of times I don't remember that I even had a thing. So I don't even know that it's missing. If I happen to remember that there is a card that exists, then my Zettelkasten is still small enough, fortunately, that I can find it just by rifling through, and I get a rough idea of where it might be. But yeah, without the taglines, things get lost, and I can't find them again.